over the top there, Peggy. But it's just to tell you a little bit about myself. I've been a professional researcher for my entire career, which is very lucky for me. I started off in STEM, you know, science, technology, engineering, maths, that type of thing, and ran a research and was the classic research scientist with a white coat on. And I did wear a white coat as well, so it looked very good, I have to say. Except in summer when you're wearing shorts, it looks good. But the point being that that was where I was for 17 years. And then I got really interested in the development of my students as researchers and professionals, as opposed to just the data they were giving me. So what I did was change career and went on a course, and it was really fabulous because it was run by two coaches way back about 20 years ago, which was highly unusual in development programs at that time. And when they first started talking to me, I was like, I haven't a clue what all of this means. And then literally I had no clue because I was a scientist, so I didn't believe in things like reflection and stuff like that. It was straight over my head. And then I started to realize the power of coaching through their coaching of me, and realized I was sleeping at night again. I knew roughly where I was going. At the end of the day, I felt a certain satisfaction with what I'd achieved instead of just anxiety about the next day. And I was actually starting to fulfill my potential. So I got hooked. I think that's probably how we all get there in the end. So I was hooked. And what I've done since, I've been able to marry that passion for research with my passion for coaching, and which has been an absolute delight. So now I do coach, normal coaching, but also research coaching. And I also work with individuals who are doing professional doctorates, i.e. they're doing doctorates in their professional work as opposed to a discipline. Okay, now we've got a few of those in America. We've got more in Europe. But basically it means that my students are mid-range professionals working and really fascinated by doing the very best for their clients and their practice. And that's a delight for me. So what I want to do today is not teach you all methodology. I know you're going to be really disappointed about that because, you know, we'll be doing all statistical tests. We're not going to go there in any way. If you do want that, I am sure Peggy will put it on very nicely. What I want to do is to really say, why do we as coaches need research? Why can we do it? And how can we use it? And I think those are the take-homes for today. So you're not going to have to think about ontologies, epistemologies, or any other ologies today. You're going to be looking at basically, what's your practice feel like? Do you think you're at the front of your game? Do you think you've got more to learn? But where does that learning need to be? That's the sort of questions we'll be considering today. So I hope that fulfills your needs for the time being. But as I said, if you want any more, just let me know, because I quite happily do the methodologies until you're all asleep. So no, there is no problem with that. So we're now time together. What I'd like to do is to really think about what research is and who researches. So when you're reading these research projects or you want to find something out, who are you interacting with? Who's on the other side of that page? What is evidence, and how can we tell if it's good evidence? And that's really quite a stumbling block for most people when they come to read something in the literature, in the research arena. Is this good, or am I being hoodwinked? Is this really relevant? Is it rigor? All of that malarkey. How can how can we use evidence in practice and really become evidence-based practitioners? And that's really a gold standard. And what is the current state of play in the literature? I will do less of that, but I will perhaps give you some models to think about of how to departmentalize research when you're looking at it and you're going out to find it. And then how can we move forward for the profession? We'll just glance at that one, but it actually shows you the way forward. In terms of the process for today, Peggy, can you keep an eye on the chat for us? Because what I really would like is not to bore myself by just listening to my voice. I would really like your voice to come through. And if you don't want to say, just put it in the chat and we'll pick it up there and then. Because if you're thinking it, chances are most people in the room are thinking the same thing. So feel confident to do that, and you'll be giving me a real gift. So I will be very happy to actually stop and just rabbit on about the next thing or the thing you're really interested in. Okay, so keep an eye on the chat and keep going for it. And interrupt me if you feel so bold. I'm very happy with that as well. So switch on your mic and go, hang on, what about? Would be lovely. So, and if we don't finish completely everything today, that's fine. We can have part 2 later on, I'm sure. So this is our time together to really explore some of the queries, quandaries that we've had around research and why we're a bit of a, sometimes it can be a little bit awe-inspiring and we're not quite sure where we're going. So if on that base, if everyone's happy with that, you could nod for me, anybody who's got a camera on, that would be lovely. And we could go forward. So I'm going to try and see if yeah. So why do we do research? Good question. Why can't we just sit there and go, oh, well, that's fine. I know everything about coaching that I need to know, and I'm quite happy just to work with my clients and work with that. And this was a question that came up with one of my master's student who went on to get a OBE, which is a big big award in the UK. And she was adamant. She was arguing with me. I don't need to do research because I'm a damn good research coach. I know what I'm doing. So I really sat, and it was a good 20 minutes, and I was rolling out all of the, well, you know, it's about this, it's about that. And then she said something, and you could see the light dawn, and she went, oh, it's about sustainability of your practice, of my practice. And I went, that's it. You're walking out of this training course, hopefully with some really up to the minute skills, etc. But we know that coaching will go so quickly that in 2 years' time, are you sure you're going to be the same good coach as you are now? And are you actually going to be giving everything that you could to your clients? So that's it. It's about, we research because we care about our clients and we care about our practice. And when I asked some coaches that I was training to research why they wanted to research, this is the sort of things they said. And I think it really puts in the point. I'm so curious about people's stories and believe that research is essential if coaching is to progress. Getting a better understanding of what I'm doing. You know, how does the magic fairy dust work? You know, how is it actually passing along? How I can do things differently, what works well. Contributing to the body of knowledge and adding credibility to my work. Creating additional value for my clients. Benchmarking best practice. You see that sort of thing. And this was actually a research project I did, so they had no idea, you know, who was going to, what I was going to ask. And this was coming out spontaneously. So we research because we really want to add back. We want to be the best that we possibly can be. And also, unless we research, we're not going to get a body of knowledge that allows us to call ourselves professionals. If we look at the criteria here of what constitutes a profession, skill based on theoretical knowledge, testing of competence, institutional training, licensing, etc., then you have a real strong basis that you need a defined body of knowledge. You can't just go call yourself a coach and decide to do counseling under coaching, etc., etc. We really want to be a professional conduct and ethics, then we must have a consistent body of knowledge. So, but a lot of people think that research really constrains us. You know, a lot of people have said things like the critique has been, it reduces people to mechanistic robots. What works, what doesn't work. We lose the essence of the individual. And that's often coming from a really perspective of scientific knowledge. You know, positivism. Sorry, I have put an ism in there. Positivism, which presupposes predictability and control, etc. And people who work with individuals are saying, well, actually, that doesn't work all the time. It's far more complicated than that. And actually, the type of research that most coaches are doing actually steps up to the plate about that complexity and actually thinks of coaching as a complex adaptive system which exists within other systems, such as the business environment itself, the workplace, the international scene, name it. So we know it's complicated, but research can start to handle that complication. Just because we say we're doing research, that doesn't mean that we're doing huge, big studies looking at people as a herd instead of individuals. That is not where coaching research sits. And in fact, as we'll discuss later, it's got very good at doing some very innovative research methodologies, which actually start looking at that individual relationship and how it evolves, even within that complexity. So,
we've had a question. It's interesting because it's something we talked about last week, and that is, what has been the evolution of coaching? When you look at how it has changed from, and we talked about this, what was available in 2002 when I started my doctorate to where we are now. I think the question was more about generational, but the person wants to know how it has evolved.
right, well, I'm just going to go, but there you go. I'm just going to skip forward. I'll go back. Don't worry, you won't miss anything. It's a really interesting question because it has evolved in a way that you would, if you sit back and look at it, you go, oh, that's obvious. But at the time, everyone was grumbling that there wasn't enough studies on this, there wasn't enough studies on that, etc. It started off really with, and it was way back in the 80s when we started getting the first sort of papers coming through in which people were saying, well, you know, you never guess, but these one-to-ones are highly effective ways of promoting learning. So you were starting to get practitioners writing their case studies up. What was happening with this? What was happening with that? And that proceeded, and I call it that exploration phase, and that's on the left-hand side of this slide, in which you're looking at what's the field of experience out there? How can we define it? How can we shape it? So you get case studies about putting coaching in different organizations, etc. Often vastly different, and in which the literature would say they were coached for 6 months and you had no idea what model was used, how often they were looked at, whether whether they had oversight, etc. So it was, in this sense, quite sometimes not quite as good as you wanted it to be, but it was still giving us a lot of information about there's something out there. This seems to be its characteristics. This seems to be the shape of it. And then we start getting what I call theory development. People started to say, okay, and I've just noticed an error on my slide, but I'll talk about it in a minute. How can we build up theories about the things that we're seeing as really important factors? So you start getting work done on relationship building. You start getting work done on goal setting. You start getting work done on duration and frequency of coaching. People start to have a feel and say, right, what's the factors that are important? And you get a shift from qualitative to quantitative work. That's the error on the slide. So you get from people putting in case studies that you start getting work that says, okay, what's the return on investment? How can we deal with this? What's the factors that are important? And this starts to build up, and we start to get a real sense of what is actually happening and what's really effective. Then, and this is where we are now, I think, we're looking at exceptions and variants. And so you're really looking at everything from ADHD coaching. We've got this real sense of online, offline, AI, etc. All of these variations of a thing, because we've got some sense of what the main piece looks like. We know the factors and we can start talking about competencies, etc. So those are the ones. So if I was, I would say that we're perhaps at the most interesting phase. And it's perhaps also the more difficult for those of you who are new to looking at this research, because back in the exploration phase, you could have a couple of hundred papers coming through. When I worked on a book called The Case for Coaching in 2000 in the UK, and it was used by the professional body, we were into theory development, etc. But my literature review only had about 350 really good papers in it. Now we're in thousands, absolute thousands. So you have to think very carefully about the question you're asking from the practitioner's point. What do I want to know? And then really start honing it down. But you've got the advantage that you'll probably find some decent stuff in there because you've now got so much built on. Peggy.
Okay, two questions, Annie, and one you started to go down the path, and that is the shift from qualitative to qualitative. I think you meant quantitative, right?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Okay.
That's the error.
And we have someone asking a post-positivistic question. Oh my gosh, Kelly. So she says, do you encounter more post-positivists today or previously?
Oh, I think more today because people are really interested in, and in fact, I wrote a paper with Elaine Cox at Oxford Brookes, which is a real centre for coaching research, in which the whole idea of what methodologies we could use to actually get underneath this relationship and how it can be most effectively driven. And those methodologies are not the big quantitative studies. Those are sitting answering different questions. But what you're doing, you've still got qualitative dealing with that type of theory building. Anything else?
That's all for now.
That's all for now. Right, I've got to go back now, haven't I? Mm-hmm. Right. I just want to ask you a bit of a question. So we're talking about one of the things I really do like is how to, before we talk about using, finding research from what's around, how do we actually take the research that we've say we found it and actually put it into practice? And too often it is not a straightforward, oh, I'll just do this. We actually have to think about it in the way of how does that fit my practice, my clients, what we're trying to achieve here? Is that research right for me? Or is it just interesting and another group of coaches can use it? Because at the end of the day, and I found this, they're trying to learn to swim by sitting at a desk. And you can't do it, basically. As we all know, you can't learn to swim sitting at a desk. You have to take all the input of this is how you do it and apply it within your own practice. Sometimes it will work, sometimes it won't. And your learning will be the same from either of those, because you'll learn what your practice needs and what it doesn't need. So bear that in mind, that you are the arbiter of whether you include it in your practice or not. Just because it's the next thing on the block doesn't mean it's right for you. Okay, and what you're trying to do and what your clients are trying to do. So having a think about what the research is basically quite useful and we need it. I'd like to just for you to take 2 minutes, and again, use the chat or anything you like, or just shout it out loud. I'd like you to consider the last time you changed your practice as a coach. Okay. Now, some of you are coming just straight out of coach training, so you could use that and be straightforward because you're constantly in change at the moment, I suspect. But how do you change it? What was the evidence that led you to change it? Did you go to one of Peggy's things and go, that's amazing, I really need to work on that? So now think, what were the characteristics of the evidence that made you trust it enough to actually change it? Change your practice. That's a big call, because your clients are precious to you. We all know. Everybody knows. So why are you going to put them in the front line of this new piece of work? What is it about the characteristics of the evidence that will allow you to trust it? So just have a minute or two and put something in the chat. That would be great. And you don't have to say the names, Peggy. You can just shout out bits that come through.
It made me think, Annie, as they're thinking, about how often in the coach development programs, people talk about the reflection on the topic and then integration into practice. So it's kind of like the aha moment that leads to that happening, that experience. So we have, when encountering someone where the style didn't match and needed to change, the DISC assessment. So looking at assessments and people's style and how people relate to style has changed a person's practice.
So you like DISC, you trusted DISC, right? And why did you trust it?
Because I told them about all of the research on it, the reliability and validity studies.
Ah, right. So we got a rigor there, yeah? Got something about rigor there.
Another person's talking about personality profiles, like, understanding who we're talking to. I think that is so amazing. Keep coming, you guys. Talk to us. When you sat through a class, you know, when we start a class, we assume you're already coaching. We don't assume you're starting from zero. We're saying, how are we tweaking your coaching practice? So when you think back to the conversations we had either in the essentials class or in the advanced program, what kinds of things showed up that you said, oh, I'm going to change a little bit about how I practice?
I would just comment on the personality profiles. You know, I heard that from you, Dr. Peggy. I had heard it a few years prior, and I actually recently heard it about a month ago. And I feel like when you hear it from just different places, it just reaffirms that this is something you should definitely try.
Like that, yes. Other people have found it useful. You're feeling
Yes.
it from a lot of different perspectives. Well, I've been asking this question for a long time because I think it's really interesting. And what we found is, and it's something I think we're starting to hear from you guys, is first of all, it has to be robust. So Peggy's saying, I told them that it was all absolutely fine. Yep, right? There is something else there, though. It has to resonate with your experience. You have to go, oh, yes, you say that, you know, light bulb moment when you go, oh, yes, something happened like that when I was with, you know, it has to have a resonance. And again, it has to be accessible, speaking directly to your practice. You want to use it. You want to get on hands-on. So I like the idea we've had quite a bit about assessments and looking at it. And finally, there has to be a reliability of the source and the author. So again, and I think you've just spoken to that when you say 2 or 3 people from different places told me. You get this feeling that, oh, hang on, there's something here. Is something worthwhile. So when you're looking at it, watch out for that, because that tells you that it's something you can use. If it's obscure and out of your experience, fine, it might be absolutely brilliant piece of research, but it probably won't be talking to your practice. Okay, you can read it for interest, but when you're starting to look at your evidence base, have a think of those. And actually, Aristotle put it down very nicely, wouldn't he? Basically, he said that is logos, pathos, and ethos. And basically, that's the rules of rhetoric. So human beings don't change very much about what we consider to be good things and we're persuaded by, because we're persuaded by the same things that Aristotle's students were persuaded by. But it's in that relevance. So what can we choose from? Now we've got a range of things to choose from in terms of evidence that we could look at. And I've got this lovely little square here because, you know, clearly we're coaches, so we have to have a square or a pyramid or something. Along the top is methodological rigor, and it gets stronger as we go to the right, okay? And then you've got practical relevance, and it's coming back, and that gets stronger as you go up. Okay, so I've identified 4 types of research that we can look at, and they'll come from different realms. You'll be looking, because I'm quite happy about accessing research in trade magazines. I write for Coaching at Work, which is the UK Europe one, and it's not an academic journal, but it's damn good at giving you an insight into things, because it's got good people writing it for it. So I would say that it's sitting very much in just on the corner between populist and pragmatic. It's not giving you all the rigor that you want to see, but it's highly relevant. As it says, Coaching at Work is the title, and it's highly relevant. You have to be a bit careful about the populist in general. Books are a difficulty. Nancy Klein's book, for instance, has not a single reference in it. and it's very interesting. It is her wonderful experience, great putting it together, etc. But in terms of rigor, perhaps less than the pragmatic evidence, which is where people have actually gone through a really rigorous set of academic work. Now, academic work means using techniques that people have found have been tried and tested over years and have got a set way of doing it. I love Nancy Klein's book, don't get me wrong, but I know where it sits. Okay, so when I look at it, I'm seeing a rich experience from an esteemed coach. And I actually listened to her speak in the after dinner speech, and she went on for an hour and a half. She was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So it's really good thing. So be careful that you know where you are when you start to look at evidence. Does that ring a bell with everyone? Yeah. So, and it really, really surprised me when I looked, and then I went to go to the bibliography and there wasn't one. Okay, so what we're trying to do here is not for you to use research about making a prescriptive model of a coaching intervention that is can be applied with unquestioning confidence. Okay, that is the opposite. It's about providing you with a map of the likely factors and the relative impacts that are operating. So you can navigate them and see whether they're right for you or wrong for you in terms of your practice. And this was Kavanagh and Grant in 2006, and I love it because I think it's a really good thing to remember. Okay, now I'm going to give you, at this point, a little useful hierarchy or category to start looking at the research that you're investigating. I do apologize, I've got the light shining directly on my face, so I'm going to move, if I may. There we go. One of my bullet windows has decided to catch the sun. So now this is a hierarchy that's used in the UK for clinical research, but actually it's very similar. There's one in the US, which is almost exactly the same with slightly different changes. And it's used for research across the Department of Health. And this means to all types of research. And it basically differentiates them down from type 1, which is identified as gold standard, which is randomized controlled trials. And we were talking about that when we were talking about how people are, how the area of coaching research has evolved. That's type 1. Type 2 is almost getting there in terms of randomized trials. Type 3 is, can everyone still hear me? Peggy, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Lovely, thank you. I just saw Peggy got very quiet, and I was thinking, oh, type 2, which is randomized controlled trial, perhaps one of them. And then we get into type 3, which is a well-designed study. So this could be interviews of coaching clients in relation to, one of my students was looking at burnout and resilience, and did a very nicely designed study on 20 individuals. No way was it randomized controlled trial, but it was incredibly well done, and it gave a huge amount of input about how to deal with burnout as a coach and what people's experience of it. Type 4 is a well-designed observational study. Say, and this is where it often comes in. The type of thing there would be if you were looking at end-of-life care and you were looking at what people enjoyed most about their final days. Was it ability to have friends round, being in a hospice or being at home, etc. All of these, you can't do a randomized controlled trial on it, but you can get a huge amount of very detailed and rich information about people's experience in type 3 and type 4. And then you have type 5, which is basically the opinion of experts. Again, the Nancy Klein, in that sense, equally as good. Now, as far as I'm concerned, and I've written a paper with this, which I will share with you with Sarah Corey who is a clinician, each type is useful. We had a whole lot of issues in coaching research with people wanting type 1 or type 2 only. But that missed the rich picture and the depth of analysis that were found in 3, 4, and 5. So what you need to do when you're looking for the literature is say, does this study actually address an issue that I want to hear about? And are the outputs of it the ones that I need to hear? So instead of it being numbers and significance, I want to hear rich stories from clients. I want to hear how they experience that. That is as valid, if it's done well, as the others. And so don't throw everything away and only go for one type. Look at the type of research that's going to answer your question as the practitioner. So 3, 4, and 5 will give you information, description, and a lot of individuality. And if that's what you're looking at, go for it. Do not think of type 1 and 2 as the only valid research. How is that useful? Yeah. That often is practitioner research, etc. So we've been there. One of the ways that we can look at coaching research is to actually think very much, because it can be, again, a little bit a little bit awe-inspiring, because there's so much out there, is to actually think of it in terms of what aspects of coaching is it really addressing. And I wrote drew this picture a number of years ago, and which was my attempt to actually departmentalize the sort of questions people were actually asking in coaching research. And there is a big central question. Does it actually work for whom, when, and how? And how can we address all of those issues? So I've identified a process, things to do with the coaching process itself. So the duration, choice of coach, modality that's used, underpinning perspective, associated with assessments. We've been talking about those, associated with performance reviews. All of those elements are part of the coaching process. But you also have issues such as the specific attributes of the coach. And we will have been talking about those in training, in particular, background, specific behaviors, particular focus in terms from the coach. And also for the coachee, the issue of readiness for change. Performance issues, work culture, organizational buy-in. All of these are sorts of factors that people have seriously attended to during research. And also one of the things is output. We knew the coaches like it, there's nothing better. What is learned? Is there differences in being learned? How does it produce behavior change? How is that change sustained? How is it identified with impact on the organization? What impact? Is it beneficial? Is it not beneficial? Is there such a thing as toxic coaching? all of those issues that need to be addressed. So again, I quite like the idea of having this sort of framework to think about what the questions are that you're asking of the research and how it actually can be addressed. So, and one of the things that I'm just going to finish off with before we go perhaps to more questions, because I'm highly aware of the time, is leader coaching. We know from our case studies that this is the sort of impact that you can achieve as coaches within your organizations. General employee engagement and commitment, improvement to business indicators and results, changes in culture, improved management skills and capabilities. You know all of this, but there is real and accelerated talent development, which I think is one of the best ones. But there's real evidence for all of this within the literature and more. So, when we've got, one of the things that often came in is return on investment studies as general. I'm really pleased that this has been left to one side now in terms of coaching research, because it's too big a question. Okay, different organizations do different things in different ways, and their identifiers for impact and returns are going to be different as well. So the idea that you can put a single figure on it across all a range of organizations is now shown to be not appropriate. You need to go into the individual culture, etc., and do appropriate studies within it. Basically, because you get issue of direction and dispersal of effect, financial return on investment is unreliable, and in order to achieve good reliability in the research, you have reduced relevance. So a lot of this is you hone down in order to control it and get your return on investment, but it's not relevant to the real, to the, you know, the swampy lowlands of practice, you know, how organizations actually work. The coaching process is itself, as I've said, again, contributes to that. But one of the biggest things, and this is where coaching research is really going at present, is what individuals create in between themselves and the strength of their working alliances. Now, this is Dehan at Ashridge, who you might have, who's a relational coach and has really pushed this. And I'm actually going to do his validation next month, and has worked very much within this in working alliances and the relationship and how it develops and the aha moments that are present during a coaching intervention. Really interesting work, which qualitative in nature, but really done with depth and rigor. So, I'm going to leave it there. I'm happy to answer questions on major particular issues of current topics. But I think that too often we've been shouting at each other through megaphones, and really there is an amazing dialogue that can be made between practice and research, in which we get the best of both worlds. Peggy, can we come back?
Come back in what way? Come
I would
back.
say, yeah, I didn't see you. What, any further questions?
There aren't any in chat right now, but I have a couple of things that I want to ask for you to share. Number one, we have a coaching research conference, a virtual conference that is coming up on May 29th. And some of the people that Annie has talked about will be part of the research, where we'll go deeper into actual studies and how they impact your practice. What have we learned? What might be an aha moment for you in your leadership, in your working with teams, other aspects of coaching practice. It's going to be a full day. And for those of you on the East Coast, there's a big benefit because you won't have to get up super early. Evie, you might want to set your alarm for 11:30 in the evening.
Oh,
But it will be recorded as well and have opportunities. So Annie, do you want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do?
yeah, now this is really interesting because what I've identified, and one of the reasons I didn't go into any detail about this is where coaching research is because it's just so large, basically. My current groups of senior coaches that are working with me on their research include leadership development programs in Sweden. I have looking at the impact of the past in research in terms of impact of coaching, but not in the sense of going to therapy, but how people use their past experience to inform how they're going to react within coaching. So that is very much on the narrative side, and that's in Singapore. Through to coaching millennials, different generations. How do they respond and what do they want from coaching? And that has been fascinating in itself. All of those will be coming to the conference, and it will be, and this is the interest, and more. And what it will be is they are all practitioners. They are all working as full-time coaches, dealing with real problems and real issues. And so when they talk about it, they'll be talking a real sense of relevance and that you can apply it directly. So the whole ethos of the research conference is, what can you take away to actually put in your practice tomorrow? How can you look at that and how can you develop it further? So, and also there's some really great ones. Saba, who's working on the narrative coaching, leads the biggest leadership program, leadership consultancy in Singapore. And this is her research, which she feels absolutely passionate about. So we're really looking forward to hearing from her. And yeah, same thing with Po, who's from Sweden. He's been in the field of coaching, I think, for longer than me. And he's still up for what we're doing in terms of leadership here and what really works. So lots to talk about coaching process predominantly, because that's what practitioners tend to be really keen on, but also outcomes as a consequence of that. So that's what I'm thinking of. What do you reckon, Peggy?
I think that's what we're noodling on right now. If you have a topic you want us to bring a researcher to talk about on May 29th, all you have to do is let either Annie or me know, and we'll see if we can find somebody in that field. For those of you that are joining as part of the Global Coaching Network, this is my passion, that I feel like I believe the Global Coaching Network is the bridge between research and practice. And Annie's right. Research and practice have been shouting at each other without really integrating what the other is doing. So how do we bring that together? How do we have those conversations so that you can hear about what's working for some folks? It might work for you, it might not. I hope you learned a lot today about all the variables that are possible in coaching practice. And as we bring researchers to talk with you about coaching practice, there's a lot of things that can be going on, but there are things we know. We know what works. So how do we keep using what works? Those of you that have been in training with me know that I am a big fan of Dr. Boyatzis and his work around PEA and NEA, and his work around the sympathetic system and the nervous system and the parasympathetic, and how that impacts your coaching, the kinds of questions you ask. And so that's what we plan to continue to do, to look at not only here's an idea, but this is where the idea comes from. This is where the concept comes from. Here's the evidence that makes it real. But at the end of the day, it is you all that take the concepts, integrate them into your practice, and make your practice more effective. So I'm super excited to see all of you on the call today, and that you joined us for the
Can I just add one thing, just as an illustration of that? Because I love this, but I'm not sure that Peggy likes it as much as me, but I like it. Which is, I had a dear student who was working with IT specialists, and she noticed and she reckoned that there was a high level of autistic spectrum there. And she noticed that it was really difficult coaching. And so she asked around, and she got lots of colleagues who were also working in the field to talk to her about exactly what that entailed. And what she found out was that the coaching model that you need in terms of neurodiversity can be quite significantly different. And that it was a real challenge, and it was not being there for your client if you didn't realize that actually they can't, they want direction, and it's not something that you would often do in coaching, but there's still a way of giving that direction as a coach and still being in a coaching format. And you can see here that that was a wonderful case of practitioner research, because nobody else had been thinking about that. They've been thinking that, oh, coaching models work for everyone. No, neurodiversity means the coaching models have to adapt to power, to neurodiversity, you name it. So it's that sort of work that's being undertaken. We're getting into the minutiae of this. We've got the major things sorted out. Now we're actually looking at the really interesting things and how we're different. Sorry, Peggy, I just wanted to put that one in because I love that one.
I completely agree with you. There are situations, especially many of you, if not all of you on this call, are leaders. And when we talk about the leader as coach, when we're talking about coaching skills and doing this and doing that, and then actually implementing them with your direct reports, it can be very different, because you might have to be directive. You might have a person that's about to lose their job. We're not going to sit around and do, critical thinking and do values to build a plan for where the person wants to go. It's going to be very direct. We talk about fierce conversations. We talk about crucial conversations. You have to do this if you want to keep your job. And so, yes, there's a continuum on coaching, and I'm glad that Annie brought that up, because so much of our coach development is about, the active listening and the process when we're working with normal, healthy people who are trying to set goals and accomplish those goals. But when they fall outside of those ranges, or how they can hear us, then we certainly have to adapt. So thanks for that, Annie.
Yeah, I would, it's really interesting, I think, and I'm not, but when we use normal, we think of ourselves, and actually so many people are so different, and that is really, and that's the joy of it. And this is one of the things about research, which I really love, because I'll actually sit there going, that's fascinating. This is how you shape your life. I had no idea that that's your worldview. So it's that sort of enjoyment and appreciation, I think, that research can really bring to bear. I could rabbit on as well, and I'm just looking at the time, and I think Peggy wants to shut me up, so I shall say.
I could listen to you for hours, but we do have people that are going back to work or eating dinner.
Okay, okay,
So
okay.
we have to be respectful. There was one last question, and I'm going to take it. It was from Stacy about toxic coaching.
Mhm.
And yeah, toxic coaching would probably press on the parasympathetic system, nervous system, where somebody goes into fight, flight, or freeze in that engagement. And so, yeah, like we are not in control. We are critical thinking partners. We don't own the outcome. Our clients own the outcome. We help them own the outcome. But when we push them to do what we think they should do, then it starts pushing on that button. So we're right at 1 minute. I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for coming today. This is recorded. Annie, people want the slides. Is that possible?
Oh yeah, of course, no problem.
Okay. So
There's
we'll
quite
give
a lot in there. So, and I'll also include for circulation the paper on how to be a practitioner research, which does go into the ontology, and some
Awesome.
other sort of goodies in the bag as well. So you
Awesome.
get things to take home.
Awesome. And next month, we're going to talk about well-being at work, and we're going to talk about the evolution of well-being at work. So for those of you that love evolution, that is what we're going to be talking about. Have a great month. And any questions at all, please reach out to either Annie or I, and we will be happy to answer them. Thank you for attending today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.